Hello and welcome to the On the Couch podcast, the podcast that gives you the view from the therapist chair. I'm your host, John Dennis, a licensed professional counselor. You're listening to OTC Episode 2, What to Expect from Your First Therapy Session. Right, episode 2. So, what to expect from that very first counseling session? It should go without saying. Unfortunately, it's not. I'm going to actually say it. If you guys listen to episode 0, episode 1, and you like what you're hearing, please make sure to subscribe, leave a review, something like that. But that being said, we'll jump right in. So you found your therapist, you did your search, you looked online, or you checked with your network and found somebody that you think fits with what's going on that you need help with. And, it's a good match in terms of how much they cost, whether they're in network and their availability, and you've got your first session scheduled. So what should you expect from that very first session? Usually I tell people, show up a little bit early. You want to make sure to find the place, get there in enough time to avoid any, traffic issues or, snafus. And depending on the practice, you may have to fill out paperwork when you get there, or they may have like a client portal online where you can complete paperwork ahead of time. So it kind of depends on each office and how they operate. We always tell first-time clients to bring a couple of things with them. You're going to need a photo ID, a driver's license, something like that. If you're going through insurance, you're going to need to bring your insurance card, and you're going to need to bring some form of payment, if you owe copay or things like that. Although a lot of practices that have online client portals, you're able to set up auto pay and put a debit or credit card on file, an HSA card, something like that, so that it just automatically takes care of that each session. But we also stress you really need to know your benefits. If you're going through insurance, ultimately that responsibility falls on the client themselves or the parent. A lot of practices, medical practices, doctors' offices, dentists are really trying to reinforce that because, heads up, I don't know if you're aware, insurance is very confusing and very convoluted, and a lot of times people assume, oh yeah, I have mental health benefits, but then when you call and find out, the real story, oh well, you have, I don't know, let's say Highmark, we'll give them a free plug like they need it, Highmark insurance, but the mental health benefits have actually been farmed out to another company, and they don't cover what you need counseling for or something like that. So it's always really important to give a call, find out for yourself before you go. Don't just assume that it's going to be covered, because we all know what happens when you assume. When I bring a client or family, back from the waiting room into my office to begin that actual session, I usually start off by explaining. I go over a little bit of the business stuff, the HIPAA and confidentiality and mandated reporting and consent to treatment and no-show policy and things like that. And then I usually jump into a little bit of, my backstory, so to speak, a little bit about how I operate and the method of treatment and focus that I use. And then I usually jump into what's called a genogram. So for those that are clinicians themselves, they're familiar with this, but a genogram is basically a detailed family tree that you kind of plot out. And I typically start with the client themselves and go back to about, parents or grandparents. It kind of depends on whether I'm working with a child or an adult, and try to get, background information on medical health history, mental health history, substance abuse history throughout the family. And it really gives me a good picture right off the bat of who is involved in this person's life, who's important to them, and you can really start to see the way things can run throughout a family tree on one side or the other, where, it seems like on mom's side, there's been a lot of heart attacks or cancer, or, man, it seems like all the males or all the females in this family seem to have thyroid issues, or, irritable bowel syndrome, or things like that. And that can be really important information for me, because it really starts to help paint the picture of, okay, what is it that's going on? And especially for kids, they kind of like to see it mapped out and drawn up. They kind of get a kick out of it. And it really helps to ease them into what is it that's going on. Usually they're so primed and ready to talk about the main issue of, I don't get along with my parents, or, I'm unhappy with my spouse, or things like that. And they're usually so focused on wanting to talk about that, or avoid having to talk about that because of all the emotion involved in it. The Genogram really kind of helps ease them into that. And then after that, once we've kind of broken the ice, I start to lead into, okay, yeah, so why are you here? How can I help? What is it that's going on? And allow them space to talk about that. And I try to, especially if it's a child, I start with them, and then I'll ask, mom or dad or whoever brought them to chime in. And I try to get a little bit of input from everybody in the room on, what are you seeing? What's going on? And then that usually covers most of that first session. A first session is typically a little bit more than an hour, just because there's so much ground you have to cover. And then I usually talk with them about a little bit of self-care afterwards, what they can expect after that session. So here I usually tell people, a lot of times coming to counseling, it's sort of like using muscles that you're not used to using. For most people, they're not used to getting on that level emotionally and thinking about this stuff directly and talking about it. And so afterwards, a lot of times they may feel, honestly, a little bit exhausted. They may feel kind of drained. And there may be a little bit of that sort of, buyer's remorse, where they kind of freak out afterwards, like, oh my gosh, what did I just tell that person? I can't believe I told them that. And I usually let people know, today you want to do some self-care. You want to, make sure you're drinking water, make sure you're eating healthy, make sure you're taking care of yourself in some way, especially if it's a session for a child. Again, I had said in the first episode, it's really tough for people to go to counseling. It's not the easiest thing to do, and you want to acknowledge that, and kind of reward your child for that, so to speak. It's something small. Just does that take them out for ice cream? Is that get a meal at their favorite place or something like that? And I also usually tell people, talking about this stuff kind of muddies the waters a little bit. It kind of brings all that stuff to the surface. And so it's not uncommon for people to have, dreams or nightmares where bits and pieces of those past experiences, or that first session and what we talked about, it's not uncommon for that to kind of work its way into those dreams. And I usually try to warn people about that and let them know, like, look, that doesn't mean that you're going crazy or you're losing your mind, or you're having some kind of psychotic episode or anything. It's it's just kind of the way the brain works. And just, pay attention to it, be aware. And then I usually give a little bit of homework at the end of that first session. And usually I explain to people, with counseling, you get out of it what you put into it. Some people, they come with an agenda and they know what they want help on, what they want to talk about, and they kind of have something that they want to focus on each time they come. And other people, they more want to sit back and hear from me about what I think we need to focus on and target. And so that's why I give a little bit of homework at the end of that first session to kind of help get me more up to speed on what's going on and how I can potentially help them. Now, I also explain to new clients that, counseling is kind of weird in that a lot of times it takes a couple of sessions before you really get a sense of, I think I fit with this person, I click with them, or no, I definitely don't. I mean, obviously, if it goes really well or really badly, usually right after the first session that, this is not going to work out. And I referenced in episode 1 the importance of being able to communicate that and being able to bring that up as an issue. And it's important to know that as the client, you're the consumer. You have a right to ask pretty much whatever you want. I mean, obviously there are like boundary issues and things like that as therapists and social workers with our training that we're going to shy away from. But you have the right to ask some questions on, so what can I expect? What is this going to look like, in future sessions? Or, what is your theory? What is your means of practice or your method of work? And what does that look like? How do you see that working with what I need to get help on? And the other is that, I mean, everybody kind of asks okay, so how long is this going to take? And I usually, I kind of chuckle at that one, and I get it. I mean, but I always try to explain it's not a car, it's not like you just order the part and you get the part in a couple of days and then it takes X amount of hours to put the part in and then you're good to go. That's not the way counseling and social work works. And I get that that's frustrating, and that we all want that, easy fix. We want the pill or the miracle solution in 2 easy installments or whatever. The other thing that most people want to know is, is this normal? Am I crazy? Am I like the craziest client you've ever worked with? And I always explain to them, that's a very sane thought to have and a sane question to ask. I think everybody wants to feel like, okay, other people deal with this, other people struggle with this. I'm not the only one, right? And I also explain, any therapist worth their salt, they're not gonna, you're not gonna go in and meet with somebody, and at the end of the session, they're gonna be like, wow, I have never heard that. Like, that is the craziest story I have ever had. Because, that's gonna freak you out, It's kind of like when you got some medical issue going on and the surgeon or whoever is like, ooh, can you sign this release so that we can put you into a medical journal? We've never seen this before. Like, that's not very confidence inspiring. And yeah, so I get that question a lot, and I try to help people with that by explaining, no, like other people deal with this kind of stuff. You are not the only one dealing with marital issues or parenting issues or, anxiety. Those are kind of, I wouldn't say standard issue with everybody, but I mean, obviously a lot of people struggle with those types of things. After I've covered all of that and I've answered any of their questions, I typically thank them for coming in and for being, brave enough, strong enough to talk with me about that I understand that must be hard for them and uncomfortable, but that they are on the right path to getting help and healing. And yeah, that's usually that whole first session. If you are looking for a therapist or a social worker, or you have questions about how to help your spouse or family member get some counseling, feel free to shoot us an email at info@parentfamilysolutions.com and just throw into the subject line counseling podcast question. And that pretty much wraps up episode 2. Thanks for checking in. Next, in OTC episode 3, I'll be sitting down to talk with Jason Bose about how to break up with your therapist. If you liked what you heard in the podcast, please be sure to hit subscribe and review our podcast on Apple, Google Play, or Stitcher. If you're interested in connecting with Parenting and Family Solutions, you can find us at www.parentfamilysolutions.com. You can also find us on the internet and social media platforms with Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, Pinterest, and pretty much just about anything else by searching Parenting and Family Solutions. You can find detailed show notes with links to any references and resources on the podcast website at www.parentfamilysolutions.com/podcast. This is your host, John Dennis, saying good night. The author and host of this podcast is not engaged in a therapeutic relationship with the listener and cannot give counseling advice without a confidential appointment. Listeners should be sure to consult with a licensed therapist in their area or seek emergency medical attention if they are experiencing psychological difficulty. Special thanks to the band The Topsy-Turvies for their song Like a Living Dead. They can be found at topsyturvies.bandcamp.com. The author and host of this podcast is John Dennis. Special thanks to producer and editor Trevor Groff.